Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.
Hello, gentle listener. We're still back in the medieval times, episode 169 of Werewolf the Podcast. William Marshal, the werewolf, is now back in the court of Count Perigo, where he's trying to get his prize. Let's see how that goes. Do us a favour, follow us on the platform you're on. Maybe even, share us with your friends. You could always press that number 5-star and give us a rating and say how brilliant we are. That would be really nice of you. Loads of stuff in the description. Go check it out. And as always, from us to you, we love you. Enjoy. Je vais. Well, it is finally dead. The dragon, that is. The dragon is dead. We have made a fire and are using its dead bulk as a windbreak. It is somewhat disquieting to have the beast behind us, but it works well in its new function on this windy and somewhat bizarre night with the windy Squire Welly, bringer of farts, and my fellows, who are, let's face it, bizarre nights. William should be dead too. He lost his arm and a large part of his shoulder. I saw it torn off. I saw him cast aside, an arc of blood following his flight to where he landed in a crumpled heap. A crumpled bloody heap. No mortal human survives that. Never mind recovering from such a wound. Why is he not dead? He tells us that the angel's wolf soul, which he has as his invisible friend, has given him extraordinary healing powers. I believe that he can heal the worst of hurts. I have seen it more than once before. I do believe, but it is very difficult to think that this is okay or acceptable by our Lord. I watch him now. He has a thick woolen cloak hung over his, remains of his torso, and it's a bloody mess. No, that is incorrect. It was a bloody mess, but it no longer is. I am glad I can not see it healing. It was very disturbing to see it dry and stop bleeding before he covered it. Not natural. I think not holy. Welly and Percy seem not to be bothered about it at all. Am I the only one that is disquieted by my friend's blessing or curse? I have drunk so much, it means I'm probably going to ask William some stupid questions. Wine is both my friend, and my enemy. It loosens my tongue and gets me to do the unfortunate things I do. Sometimes these things end in, wonder and joy. Sometimes these things end in horror and sadness, but I would not be without it. Not without wine in this world. William? I try to get his attention drunkenly. He is staring into the flames of the fire, rocking back and forth as he does so. He does look to be in some evident distress. Sweat bristles on his forehead as lines of pain crease his face. Oh, what must he be going through, my poor friend? Percy is trying to teach Welly the zither. Welly is no natural musician, but I smile as I see Welly's brow knot as he tries. He wants to be able to play. I am not sure that he wants to be a musician. I am sure he sees the results of being a minstrel, such as Percy and the things that brings. Like Percy's life has the interest of the women and the fame a performer brings to him. So who can blame him? Welly, that is, for the want of this. Percy has a market that I cannot gain. While minstrel and apprentice are focused on themselves, I need to speak to William. William! I again try to raise his interest, casting a small stone at him which hits his thigh. William wearily turns to me and smiles.
Yes, Gervais. What is it?
He is white of hue and, weary. His eyes are full of woe. It makes my heart quail, but I reach for him verbally to try and offer succor. Do you truly think that it is normal or Christian that you can heal like you do? I asked out of concern. It hurts to ask, but I need to know what he truly thinks. I know that you make the argument that it is a gift from God, the wolf soul that is, but it seems wrong. A man should die if so badly hurt. No one should live from the level of harm that has been committed on your body. I paused. This needed more. No one, William. Not even someone saintly. William turned to me, not in disrespect for the question, but in thought. I could see the pain that his simple movement brought to him. He glanced to his left and nodded at empty space. I knew he looked upon the soul I could not see. I imagined that they conversed in some manner. I saw expressions flit across his face. He was somehow talking to something in a way I could not hear. He would be seen as mad or possessed by anyone outside this small friendship circle. If I did not know him as I did, I would be happy to light the pyre myself that cleansed him of the demon. I fostered that thought, that he was mad or possessed for a moment, and then he tried to speak. It cost him much.
You ask me if it is normal. You ask me if it's Christian.
He paused in thought. Even he had to think whether this was acceptable or not.
Normal? No.
He paused and ran his tongue over his teeth. I could see that they were red with blood that had flowed.
Christian?
He spat a bloody gobbet on the fire and looked again at his invisible friend, shaking his head.
I don't not.
He tried to turn to the worm dead where it was. The pain of his movement stopped him, and he bit back a gasp.
But he stands by my side as I do God's work.
Eventually, he raised his cup to me, wanting me to respond with something similar. I stared into his eyes. I looked deep into my friend's soul. I trust him implicitly. Was he being fooled by the devil? He believed he was doing good. I knew not what I thought, but then I rested my hand on that scaly flank behind me. Those scales were bright and glistening, hard as steel plate, but much thicker. He had killed this thing. Maybe. Just maybe evil can be used for good. I find it hard to swallow, William, I told him, knocking a knuckle on one of the dragon's horny plates. I fear for your soul. I returned my attention to the fire. I could not hold his eyes as I continued. William lowered his drink and to himself muttered,
Which one? William. I had torn myself from the gullet of the worm. Tooth and claw had done its worst to the soft lining of the beast's innards. Welly's cunning plan had worked. It had been like a rebirth, a bloody, horrific birth where I ripped a path from the beast's belly. On my out, I had deemed it dead. I had celebrated its demise too early. And as it drew its last breath, it had wrenched me in twain. My shoulder and arm had been removed in the animal's bite as the dragon had bit and shook its mighty head. Its teeth had sheared through me, taking my flesh and casting me to one side. Oh, such agony, such pain. That night had been long and full of misery. I can survive the worst of wounds. I somehow can heal horrific injuries. But the process of that recovery and the pain that coincides with it is no joke, I can tell you. I now wondered if what I felt was worth living through. Suffering makes the man. And if so, then I should be a veritable monster of a man. Which, as you know, I am. I felt the flesh bubble and the muscles rebuild. The wounds twitched and movement happened beneath my blood-soaked cloak. I hid the horror from my compatriots. I did not want them to see this vile process. In truth, I hid it from myself as well. I would not be able to cope with seeing this dreadful thing. I would try to close my eyes and get some blessed relief in sleep, but it betrayed me. Sleep and relief, that is. Maybe I have to feel the process take place for it to happen. Maybe. The night had been a long and uncomfortable one. By the morning, I had a new arm, and there was no evidence of any injury apart from my ruined clothing and armor. I had no replacement for my damaged kit, so I looked odd as I sat in the early morning light, bleary-eyed and half-armored. The gouging bite of the worm is evident only in my torn protection. Gervais, Percy, and Welly eventually fell into fitful sleep. They lay around the place wrapped in cloaks, snoring. Fenrir sat by me. Nothing was being said between us, but we both enjoyed each other's proximity as the agony racked me. This new morning was a blessing. Peace reigned, and I sat and thought about what we had achieved. Had it been a miracle? It had to have been a miracle. Surely. We were a bunch of odd saints now. I could not presume it, but we had done miraculous work. Me and my brave fellows. Welly woke and sat up, yawning deeply. He still had his eyes closed and stretched before rubbing them and blinking them clear. He smiled as he focused on me. And then reality bit as he saw the huge body of the beast now dead. I smiled back at him, I did. He was already a worthy part of my circle, was Welly. Although his cunning plan nearly ended me, it had worked, and I had to thank him for that. I smiled and nodded. He stood and started his campsite duties. As the day progressed, we packed up our things in silence and made ready for our journey back to the court of the Count. Percy had removed the gigantic rubies that were the serpent's eyes. He joked that if he was asked what the rubies were, that he would tell the inquirer they were the dragon's balls. Oh, how we laughed. Laughing made us feel normal again. It brought us back to reality. The stones were as big as a man's head and were weighty. The giant stones were faceted and clear and must have been worth untold gold. They were truly beautiful to look at. Gervais had prized free several of the large scales that had covered the beast's body as proof of our kill, and I had taken the animal's tongue and its most enormous fangs. Between us, we had more than enough proof to attest to our win. Our win. I laugh. Our luck had seen us through this, nothing more. By midday, we were supped and horsed, ready for the journey back to the Count Perigold's castle. Still with no words and living in our own minds, we set off and would be there in half a day. We had won. We had killed the worm. We had won. We had earned our payment, and it was time to celebrate and collect that prize. We should have been filled with joy. We should have been celebrating and happy with the win, yet we were not. We had survived, but often after something like this, it was difficult to grasp what had been done. We had killed a dragon. We had killed a dragon. After this, the mundanity of a typical day seemed impossible to fathom. On our return, we had entered the chateau as heroes. Much pageantry and prestige had been our finding on our return. We'd been given rooms and made the talk of the court. The men looked at us with admiring eyes, and the women with want. It would be a night of nights. At the Lord's board we ate. The finest foods were given to us. The worm's teeth, tongue, and scales sat before the Lord. He and his daughter, little Em, sat close by, and she, in her 13 years, only had eyes for young Welly. Young Welly, who had become the worthy hero of our tale. Percy had told the story of our battle to the court. Welly's cunning plan had not been omitted. It was much played upon, and the little man gained much fame from the telling of this tale. I had never seen a boy so happy in himself. He would not become arrogant, though. We knew that Welly could not become arrogant. He was prideful, yes, but he understood that he was no one special in the eyes of our Lord. I found I liked him ever more as a young man this night. As Percy finished the story, he brought out the rubies. He could hardly support their weight in each hand.
Behold, the testicles of the monster!
He laughed as he showed them to the people. He received a great ooh of awe from those present. Disbelief at their size ran through the room. I caught the eye of the Count as he saw them. His look of want was evident to me. Ah, Percy. In his jest, he may have caused us a difficulty. As Percy cavorted about the place with his rubies held at his crotch, doing his impression of a worm, the Count called over another to his side. The man was not tall, not powerfully built, but lithe. His cloth was of a rich yellow, picked out with black embroidery and finery. Black pearls, opals, and onyx looked good on that yellow background. I nudged Gervais, who was sinking a drink, as was his wont. "Who is that man with the Count over there, Gervais?" I asked. Was all I got from the disturbed man. I knocked him again, and openly pointed at the man next to the Count. "Pay attention!" My words were a little strong, and Gervais looked at me a little disturbed. He repeated. Him there, Gervais. Who is he?" I tried to say with a little more kindness. Gervais focused on the man and finally spoke.
That man there is Bruce Duel. He is reputably a great warrior. Why do you ask?
"I have a feeling about him. Call it a hunch."
Of what?
Gervais smirked. "I have a feeling that our Count is not happy about something, and he's going to use our friend there to cast the first stone of his plan," I told him. Percy had settled into his seat after having to retell the best bits of the story again to the court's youngsters. He winked at me, and the minstrels began to play as we all fell to our food. And what food it was, I might tell you. After we had eaten our fill, the room was altered for the dance. The leader of the dance took his place and nodded at the Count to ask permission to start the festivities. Many beautiful ladies prepared themselves to be in the arms of the heroes this night. Percy was already in the eyes of many of them. The Count stood. For the first time, I saw something different in his demeanor. I saw some want for evil in his face, and his glance at Percy and the stones that he held convinced me of the truth of this. Eventually, the crowd was lulled into silence by the Count's gestures. "This night is a night of celebration for all here. These brave men have been to fight, and they say they have killed the worm." Cheers suffused the room. "They have brought me proof of it by bringing this evidence. The teeth and the tongue of the beast itself. His raised hands were brought down to present the prizes I had brought. He reached for his cup, and he lifted it. "For these, I give them thanks!" He yelled and raised his golden cup to cheers before taking a drink, as did everyone in the room. Then, clapping and voices were raised in salute. The Count reached an arm to his young, plump daughter. He and his offspring held hands, and he helped her stand embarrassed before the crowd. Cheers erupted, and it took a while for them to be quieted by the Count's waves. "They saved the most precious thing in my life. My my beautiful daughter." Gervais nudged me at this announcement and raised his eyes. I smiled back at him. She was quite plain, actually. Well dressed in flouncy pinks, but quite plain. "And for that, we must thank them!" He yelled to the grateful members of the crowd who cheered and yelled their tributes to us. "I now call upon them each to stand and accept their reward of our hearty thanks. First, the squire, Welly." Welly stood with a reddened hue, trying not to make eye contact with the others in the room. "Second, Lord Percy of Nerson-Bolland." Percy stood and bowed with practiced ease of a performer. His eyes looked around the room at each face, lingering on those he saw as the prettiest, and offering them a small, personal smile. "Sir Gervais de Montagne." Gervais took to his feet and quaffed his tankard as the people cheered. "And of course, William Marshal, the leader of this trip. We give them all our thanks as a reward for their hard work. And with that reward, they will leave us tomorrow." Gervais looked at me with raised eyebrows. We both wondered why we would need to depart so soon. "They leave us with our thanks as a reward for their chivalric work. What more could such pious, loyal men want or ask as a reward?" Gervais and I held eyes. This was not the payment. It was merely a thank. We were to be rich, to have the fleece that they promised. Percy paused in his perusal of his flesh prizes for the night. He turned to the Count with evident confusion on his face. He tried to speak, but the crowd cheered and sang over him so that he could not be heard. Again he tried to talk, but he was ignored. Gervais then bellowed. He was a bear of a man, and it brought quiet. And the guards reached for their swords. It was all very loud. When silence finally fell, Percy stood in a pose of shock at Gervais' outburst. He nervously smiled and fumbled with the kerchief in his hand.
"What is it, Percy?"
Gervais angrily asked the nervous man while cowing the eyes of the audience before him with a stare.
"Well, our prize was it not to be the fleece, was it not?"
he asked. The silence of the crowd deepened. Percy's loving audience turned head by head to look at the Count. The Count sat with his fingers tapping on the armrests of his throne-like chair. His displeasure at this question was evident. The Perigord considered Percy. He rested his chin on his right hand while he continued his finger taps with his left. Eventually, after some time, he spoke. "It was, but I do not think that the attacking of this worm was worthy of such a thing now. It was an easy task by all rights. A task that took you merely 3 days. The fleece is not worthy of this task. You are not worthy of this fleece. Look at those rubies that you have decided to keep. Those stones that by all rights should belong to me. They should be mine. But I am grateful enough to allow you to keep them. You should really thank me for those stones, because I could make them mine and back you off with naught but the simple thanks that make up all that you deserve. He told the gathered people, his voice gravelly and holding a threat. Gervais' eyes and mine met across the room once more. He gave me a resigned smile and a shrug. I nodded back. The giant wolf soul went and stood next to the Count and stared at him. We were all in slight disbelief at what had been said. We were not prepared for it, and it would take a while for us to consider our options. Percy, being the brave knight he was, looked at me for assistance. But it was Gervais who took to his feet and brought the room to quiet once more. I became interested and excited. Gervais was wonderful to hear when he showed anger. His rants were superb to sample and enjoy, so long as you were not the target of such tirades.
I raise my cup to the Count,
said Gervais, a cheer from the crowd.
I also remind him that he made a promise.
He lifted the wine to his mouth and drank it all down before continuing with his monologue.
So when we decide to leave...
He paused at this, meeting the Count's eyes.
And when we decide to leave, we will expect the fleece to be loaded up on a wagon ready for its transportation home. That is what just a noble lord would do. They would be grateful for the life of their brat.
He spat the word brat.
Grateful enough to give us what he promised.
He smiled and raised his cup to the audience, a confused audience that did not know how to respond. The way he had raised his drink would infer that they should cheer, but what he'd actually said meant that maybe they should not. They murmured and they burbled. Gervais held his pose waiting for the Count's response. I think not, brave Sir Ned. You will not be taking my fleece. It is a man, and man it will remain. You could try to become the brigand and take it, of course, but I think the men of my court would soon make you wise to that attempt, the Count said. Gervais bowed dramatically to the Count and his retinue who now stood by him. They had hands on weapons. The knight in yellow sat back in his seat, smiling and eating a chicken leg. He seemed to be enjoying this evening's entertainment.
I apologize then, my lord,
said Gervais.
In this case, I will have to hand over to William to show you the error of your ways. I did try to help you, but now I sit back and will enjoy watching the floor show.
He then turned to me with a flourish and invited me to take the floor.
Try to be kind,
he shouted across the room. I now stood and bowed to the crowd. Again they were in confusion, as this was not how it was supposed to go. So, Count, you renege on your offer, do you? I asked. I do, sir, he said from his seating position. He did not even do me the decency of standing to address me. I do, sir, and there is nothing you or yours can do about it. He smiled, and the 20 or so knights that sat with him oozed confidence. They should have. There would be 3 against them. Unfair odds in their eyes, but unfair in their favor. Perhaps not. Maybe it was unfair of me not to include our fourth. 3.5 against 20 or so, including Whaley. I feigned being flustered. I acted showing mock fear. Fine. I accept the terms. The Count and his men laughed. The crowd cheered. They relaxed. But I was waiting for the crowd to quiet. I sat down in my seat as though beaten, humbled, and at a loss. I could not meet any of the eyes that stared at mine around the room. It was a good act. After a few moments, at the point that everyone understood I had lost this verbal joust, I laughed out loud and lifted my feet, settling them on the table. Now it was I who oozed confidence. A price was agreed, my lord, and I shall not leave here without that which was promised. The court was now completely silent and intent on my words. A fleece of gold, I believe, was the bargain, was it not? Now if you will not give that, then I will have no option but to take. I gave this as a threat relatively quietly whilst considering a haunch of venison before biting into it. As I did so, I looked at the Count and considered the flesh in my mouth to be the flesh upon his bones as I tore it from its frame. The Count leapt to his feet at the table, scattering items hither and thither. "There is no fleece for you, you idiot!" The Count was angry at my flippant manner. Fenrir, more than any other, loved it when this mood took me. It was infrequent, but I could not allow injustice, and he knew that however far I was pushed, I would always push back harder. "There is no fleece for you!" He spat on the floor at the end of the sentence. "And there is no fleece for that fool de Tankerville. Your journey here was wasted. You were only to be sacrificed to the worm. You were not even supposed to kill it. You were supposed to show us our enemy." Bruce here watched as you took on the dragon. He was supposed to be the one who finished it. The Yellow Knight. Bruce Galilee. The Yellow Knight looked at me and nodded arrogantly, his hubris plain for all to see. "Now I have changed my mind about the affair I made. I now give you 1 hour to get your things and leave my home, or I will set my hands upon you," he told us. "I think not, my lord," I replied. "I do see a golden fleece right here in this court, and it will be that which will fill my sack this day, and woe betide any man who tries to stop me, for they will be slain by my hand without remorse. And as God is my witness, I stand prepared to take every accursed life in this castle to clear our route to justice." The assembled nobles were deathly silent. All that could be heard was the crackling of the logs in the hearth of the fire. "Now, I offer you the chance to pay your debt or pay my price. It is a simple choice, and I have no more appetite for conversation." I now focused my all on the food, and I ate. In the susurrations of the hall, I heard the long, slow grind of a heavy wooden chair being pushed back over a stone and straw floor. I could see what was happening through my Fenrir's eyes, and it was with no surprise that I saw the Yellow Knight, Bruce Delalay, stand. His look was of anger, and it was directed at me.
"I challenge you, fool!"
He shouted across the room. I heard all through my and Fenrir's ears, but I knew it would be much more fun to ignore the man and make him even angrier by my doing so. His nature was that of a narcissist, and he was not good at being ignored or not listened to. Gervais knew I was mocking him with these actions. He turned to me and called me.
"William!"
He called. I turned to him in my seat and smiled.
"William, the jester speaks!"
He laughed, pointing to the now fuming knight.
"A limerick, my man. Go on, a dirty limerick would be most welcome at the moment."
He continued.
"I am no jester!"
Yelled the angry man.
"He is correct, William,"
added Percy as he looked at his zither and strummed a few notes.
"He certainly is no jester, although his outfit is certainly that of a mummer of the court."
He added. A few laughs were given by the assembled people, which made the Yellow Knight livid. His gaze swept the room. Wherever it landed, silence reigned. And this is why I loved my fellows. They knew exactly the right buttons to push to make this man reckless and stupid. Even the boy Squire Welly chimed in.
"Now, he ain't got nothing on old Mama Peasbod, has he? He can make me laugh just by that walk of his. Do you think that this one will have a funny walk? I do love a funny walk."
"I am not a jester, nor a mummer,"
interrupted the knight. He drew 2 swords from his belt. The first was a hand and a half that he held in his right. The second was a short sword that he had in his left. He was a student of Montclavier, a great swordsman who in duel and single combat used these weapons himself. It's a difficult combination on the battlefield for sure, but it's almost impossible to defend against in single combat.
"I will fight and kill any man who wants to stand against me this day. I am the winner of over 200 duels. I am a champion of 20 or more tournaments. I am Bruce Delalay, the most feared knight that this continent has ever raised. I laugh and spit at your pitiful manners, you heathen knights. Fight me to the death, if you would, you cowards."
He now strode from behind the table to the center of the hall. He flourished his blades in a very fine manner. The skill of the man was evident. He was an artist of the sword. Not merely a fighter, more than that. He leapt and span, doing somersaults and aerial spins. He fell to his back and in a complicated set of movements flicked to his feet again, and then somersaulted and landed in a squatting pose, his short sword behind his head, and his hand and a half pointed down in front of him. Percy had watched all this open-mouthed, and once the Yellow Knight had stopped with his final flip and held his pose, he started a wholehearted clap.
"Bravo! Bravo!"
he said with much gusto, doing a great impression of someone impressed by what he'd seen. In fact, he may well have been actually impressed knowing Percy.
"William! Gervais!"
Percy called on us.
"Did you see that? Truly inspiring. Though I don't have any coppers on me. Could you lend me some pay for our entertainment, please?"
He inquired.
"You dare to mock me, sir?"
The Yellow Knight yelled at Percy.
Oh, no, not in the slightest. The spitty roundy stuff was wonderful, but I only have silver in my purse, though. I would require some coppers for your payment.
He replied, offering the knight no chance to look into his money bag. Gervais, Welly, Fenrir and I were now laughing at Percy's ability to play the dull-witted fool. The knight thought that we were laughing at him. Which was, to be truthful, somewhat correct.
I challenge you to single combat, sir! Pah!
He now shouted at Percy.
For what? I just paid you a compliment.
Percy looked at him aggrieved. He took his eyes from him in a dismissive way.
I refused to fight someone as lowly as yourself.
He replied, returning his attention to his zither with interest. The poor knight did not know how to respond to this. He just stood with his mouth open. That was not how a response to such a request should go. How would he respond in turn? He started to open his mouth and direct his low-wit at Percy when Gervais butted in.
I tell you what, I will fight you,
said, wobbling to his feet, obviously acting drunk.
'Cause I can see both of you, and know that I can take you both in those pretty outfits of yours.
He drew his sword, which landed on the ground at his feet as he tottered about for a moment, trying to reach for it. As he managed to grasp the blade after a few attempts, he turned and banged his head on the corner of the table.
Ow!
He hollered, then giggled as he stood upright, rubbing his jaw and swaying a little. He hiccuped now and smiled as he slipped and fell back onto his bench seat, flailing onto the floor with a thump and starting to laugh hysterically as his sword slid under the table.
Whoopsie!
He yelled in between his bursts of laughter.
I will not fight this drunken idiot. He is not worthy of combat,
the Yellow Knight said nobly. From his prone position, Gervais responded.
And who are you calling a drunken idiot, sir?
He paused.
No, I take that back. Who are you calling an idiot?
He yelled out, now lost in laughter again at his own wit. Bruce Delalay turned now to me.
Will you have the guts and the gizzard to fight me?
He asked, pointing his short sword at my chest. I saw the Count smirk. This was exactly what he wanted. I stood up and finished my ale, placing the cup on the table dramatically, and then I belched. Fenrir was now pushing me to engage, for the wolf to be unleashed, and for me to rip this knight a new hole to holler from. But I wanted to face this man as myself. I strode to the center of the hall and stood looking at the man. I raised my hands, to which he flinched back responsively. He knew now that he'd been played, as I smiled at him and rolled the sleeves of my shirt to my elbows. I took my time, which made his discomfort more apparent.
To first blood,
he said, as he stepped back and adopted his fighting stance. I shook my head at him, finishing my mouthful before I spoke.
No, I do not play. This will be a fight to the death,
I told him. I saw the shock in his eyes, but he was a noble man, a brave fellow, and he nodded. I drew my sword and leant on it as if I were an aged man with a cane. He circled right and away from what he assumed would be my sword arm. His swords were ready in some sort of en garde position. I smiled and watched him move with interest, trying to follow him while remaining wholly on the spot. As I watched, I distractedly raised my right hand to pick some flesh from between my teeth with my thumbnail. His response to this was that I must actually be left-handed, so he started to circle back left. Predictable. Which he really was. Once ready, he swung his swords and stepped in a triangular pattern on the floor. He was constantly changing the threat of what he offered. Was it a stabbing slash from the left or a swiping cut from the right? Was it a head attack or was it a stab to the inside of my thigh? He hit it well, in fairness. What he did not know was the unnatural speed that I have as a werewolf. Even as a man, I can slow down time in my head as he attacked. I could easily catch any attack and retaliate before he knew what had happened. So, I slowed his patterns down in my mind. I saw the low sweeping fake of the first attack towards my knee. It swung down, then at the last minute turned towards my hip. He pulled the blow just before it struck and stabbed forward with all his might at my chest with his short sword. But I was already there. How could I be there? He could not understand how I had moved that quickly. I caught the stabbing sword in my right hand and allowed it to slide forward in my leather-gloved grasp. To his surprise, I stepped in front of the blade, holding the point of the attacking sword at my sternum. His face changed from grim pleasure to shock. I now moved forward and allowed the blade to sink hilt deep into my chest. It stopped dead as the handle hit my rib cage. The crowd surrounding us gasped. It was a killing strike, and I had let it happen. I had actually placed the plunging sword on that path myself. I was now face to face with the man. Here, he could simply watch me die. His face of celebration changed to that of horror as he saw my face and my smiling countenance. What had just happened? Time returned to normality, and I spat at him. And as the spit traveled, my head followed it in close succession. His eyes closed in response to the saliva as it struck his face, and they remained closed as my forehead smashed into his nose with a sickening crunch that left him wincing and half scrambling back, half falling back, trying to save himself from the uprushing ground. His vision was blurred. He could not see properly. In order not to fall, he had to let go of the handle of that sword, the sword with which he had skewered me. Even feeling blind and confused at my actions, he knew he had killed me. He must have killed me. And he found it within himself to smile as he wiped his eyes clear. But oh, how wrong he had been. Once he could see again, he focused on me. And that smile. No one in my position should be smiling as I was. His face changed as I grasped his sword with my free hand and began to withdraw it from my body inch by inch until it was bloody and in my grasp. I took my eyes from his to the blade, and I shrugged. The blood that ran from the wound on my chest stopped. I shook myself down and hefted his blade. It had a nice weight to it. I looked back at him, and he, in return, looked at me, confused and now with such fear. I cast his sword behind me with a notable clang.
What
What?
Were the stumbling questions that came from the Yellow Knight, Bruce de la Ley.
Why did you do that?
He was at a loss. Because, noble knight, I know I can beat you with only one sword. I told him, bringing it crashing down at his head with a speed and precision that he had never seen before, and never would again.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.